The journey to product management is a typically atypical journey. And it's no different for Jessica Dubin. Jessica got to tell me this story of her going from education as a Harvard University Graduate School of Education grad all the way through to being a chief product officer of Remesh, an AI focused research platform. And what I loved about her background in education is that she started to understand that context changed the outcomes, right? Context changed our understanding of how people enter a space, either individually or collectively. She tells the story of taking a personality test, a Myers Briggs or something like that. And in one version, when she was in one context, the personality test came back with her being introverted. Well, years later, she's in a different context, and the same test resulted in totally different outcome of her being an extrovert or a different person. I think that's true. The context, the environment, the culture that we're walking into is going to affect the way that we work together with our peers, that we serve our users, and build great products. I think you're going to love this conversation. So let's jump right in. Well, Jessica, welcome to the podcast. I'm so honored to have you here. I'm going to hand it right to you. I'd love for you to do a quick introduction and tell the people who you are and what you do.
Great. Thanks so much, George. I'm really happy to be here. I'm Jessica Dubin. I'm the Chief Product Officer at Remesh. We are an AI-powered research platform. So we help people understand and get deeper insights into whatever they're studying, whether it's employee engagement, market research. We're getting into the AI space now as well. So it's been an exciting journey.
So tell me about your journey to that role as chief product officer, or specifically at this company. What's the path look like to get to that?
Yeah, I'd love to. I feel like as a product leader, I have this typically atypical journey where
Yep.
all the pieces don't really seem like they're adding up to anything until the end. And then you find product and you're like, oh my gosh, this is it. Fireworks go off. So my particular background, I studied science and technology as an undergrad and a grad student. In undergrad, I really didn't know what I wanted to do with it. I just found it really fascinating to study the application of technology. And I ended up applying for Teach for America. I got in, and I have such an appreciation for teachers coming out of that experience. But I also really importantly learned the lived experience of how the environment impacts cognition or how you're able to function. I remember I had this one student, Jaquan. We were in a school with no walls. So just to set the
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
there's no walls, there's linoleum floors. I was a new teacher. I was building my classroom using whiteboards and bookshelves. And this little kid, Jaquan, this is first grade, and he would never stay in the classroom. He was always running around, bouncing off the walls. And one day I needed him to do something. I needed something. And I was like, Jaquan, can you do this for me? And it really changed the dynamic. All of a sudden, when he had a clear role to play, when he had a job, became my helper and he was by my side, and it really changed the dynamic. And that's something that has stuck with me, is that ability to change behavior based on kind of your context and where you are. And I experienced that myself. So when I was in Teach for America, it was a very limited, constrained environment, very high stress. And I remember I took this Myers Briggs exam as part of Teach for America, and I registered as an INTJ, I meaning introverted.
Mm-hmm.
And then I ended up in graduate school a few months later, probably 8 months later, no more. And I took the same Myers Briggs exam. And graduate school was this expansive, so many opportunities. I felt so well supported. And I registered as an ENTJ, E meaning extroverted.
Wait a minute.
And I found that so fascinating that over the course of a few months, depending on my context, it actually changed a deeply held personal characteristic from introverted to extroverted. So
Wow.
yeah, that was really fascinating to me. Um, fast forward in my journey, so I ended up having the opportunity to come out to the Bay Area, which is something I always wanted to do. And I was working for a company that created innovation curriculum for kids.
Hmm.
And I was sitting with a VP one day, and we were talking about what new curriculum we were going to design. And she said, let's do another chefology curriculum. Chefology was like a cuisine, teaching kids how to cook and be creative
Yep.
in the kitchen. And I was like, why? Why another chefology? I mean, the ones we have are popular, but why not do something new and push the boundaries and figure out something that's going to be really exciting for the business? And it was that question of why that got me the budget and the acceptance of the company to go out and try piloting new programs, new ideas, new curriculum. I had a team that we got to iterate on the curriculum every week. And I fell in love with this development process. This idea that you can take a nascent idea, bring it out to the field, test it, iterate with the team, and build something that ultimately is high ROI for the business. And it has really good engagement and NPS scores. And I remember doing this and thinking, like, is this a job? Can I do more of this? And
Yes.
yeah. So I set out on this journey to figure out what this was. And I ended up interviewing, I was in the Bay Area. So luckily I was able to tap into my network, and I identified 11 different product managers that I could interview. And they were across, a range of companies and industries. I remember, I talked to someone from Uber and other people from smaller companies, and I just asked them what they did as a PM. And I took that information set and compared it to what I was doing and identified where my biggest gaps were, which probably not surprisingly was on the tech side. I didn't have a technical background.
Sure. Sure.
Yeah. So I started to teach myself some HTML just to understand what that was like in coding. I did try to teach myself JavaScript, and it was a total fail. I was not
It's a
good enough.
different thing. It's a different thing.
It's hard, yeah. But I learned enough, and I figured out how to speak to that story well enough that I landed my first product job in ed tech, and I fell in love with product. I was a sponge. I wanted to soak up every podcast, every article. I really found my fit. And one of the things I wanted to talk about today is kind of that importance of context and of building strong teams. And one thing I learned along the way that I wanted to mention up front is this idea of bringing your full self to work. I fell in love with
Mm.
product, but I learned the hard way that I also needed to be myself at work. So I was working at a company, and we were doing this a team building exercise where it was all remote. It was during the pandemic.
Of course.
And we all had kind of a circle on a digital whiteboard, and we were writing what we knew about each other, visualized, in different spaces. So people had, skateboarding and different sports and hobbies that people were in. And I had a circle. And every time someone got to my circle, they would draw a dollar sign, because at the time I was leading monetization and billing. So people knew what my
Oh.
job was. And one person drew a baby because they knew that I had been out on parental leave. And I'm looking at my circle compared to everyone else's circle. And I was like, this is not good. There's a problem.
Mm.
Nobody knows who I am.
Right.
And that lack of relationship is making things harder than it needs to be. And it's not as fulfilling for me. So that was something that I decided in my next role. I was going to make sure that I developed relationships, that I put that front and center, because I knew it was going to pay off not only for how I felt at work, but also for my ability to do good work and be successful.
Let's take a break to tell you about our sponsor this week, Crema, a design and technology consultancy. At Crema, we know that navigating through periods of rapid change and scaling can be daunting. Broken systems, misaligned teams, delivery delays, and gaps in customer engagement are just some of the challenges that can arise when growing like this. That's where Crema steps in. Crema acts as a trusted partner, helping you overcome these hurdles on your journey to becoming a tech-enabled organization. Crema is excited to announce 3 new services designed to empower your product teams. You may have heard of the product triangle: design, product, and technology. Well, we're excited to help you navigate all three. First is our UX audit. This isn't just a review, it's a deep dive into the user experience to uncover transformative insights that serve as a blueprint for greater success. Next is our team assessment. This service helps you identify the strengths and gaps in your product team, arming you with the knowledge to excel. And finally, a code quality assessment. It's essential to ensure that your technology is not just working, but thriving. Our experts will enhance your code base to improve performance, security, and scalability. Ready to get the most out of your existing product teams? Visit crema.us today and learn how Crema's new services can help you navigate your biggest challenges. Now back to the show. So
So,
people will often talk about, okay, yeah, you want to be seen and known and heard, and they think first about it being kind of this individualistic thing, right? It's the, oh, you want to enjoy your job, you want to feel good, and that is a great byproduct, is awesome. But talk a little bit about how that context brought into an environment like ours of product and technology and innovation and this really hard work, yet very collaborative, very creative process. How does that context coming into the space actually make the work better, the results better?
yeah, you nailed it with the relationships and the collaborative piece. Our work is so cross functional and collaborative. I think about us as that connective tissue in the body. If all the different functions are organs and you have your structure, the bones, product, and the culture that we create is that connective tissue. And without really strong collaborative culture, the body just doesn't work well. Um, so, practically speaking, my experience not being known meant that I had harder times accessing people at that organization. I wasn't able
Mm,
to get as much done as I could otherwise. So it was actually hindering, I think, my work. And then by contrast, at my current organization, based on that experience, I made it a priority to build up those relationships. And we have very, very transparent conversations between our leadership in sales and in marketing and in product. And we're able to discuss what's working and what's not working and be
mhm,
really honest with ourselves. And it's that ability to be transparent and identify, okay, this isn't working, we need to make a change, and then change that allows you to be successful. I think otherwise you end up staying and sticking with processes or kind of the status quo. You don't have the ability, especially when things are getting hard, to have
mhm.
those hard conversations, and then you end up getting driven into the ground. Not all of the time, but I really do think that that collaboration is critical to innovation, which is, a buzzword, but is
Yeah.
critical to doing iterative work and seeing yourself all the way through to success.
We just had a conversation with a big enterprise here recently, and we met with their leadership team, and I walked away going, that was that was eye-opening for me because what I saw was a relatively diverse group of people, all with extremely different areas of influence. And so there was technology was there, and there was kind of this innovation group and productization group. There was a person that was kind of in the design sector, and they all had very distinct roles and responsibilities. At the end of the conversation, though, at first I thought, man, they don't like each other. This is there was a bit of heat, and yet within the heat, just underneath it was this level of also respect,
Mm-hmm.
because 2 seconds later, I realized they've all been working together for like 30 years
Oh,
and
wow.
different time, 15, 30 years, but a long period of time where they know each other well. They've probably all of their kids have grown up together. They've gone out to eat together. They've gone to conferences together. They've failed together. They've won together. And their company has gone from being a local engineering firm to being a global conglomerate engineering firm, like huge. And I was so impressed by exactly what you're describing, which is this permission to challenge and to have conversation and debate and to question and to ask why and to explore, even though they each were coming from it from a different context.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I tell my team that that tension is good. I
Yes.
know product managers, engineers, designers, they don't see it eye to eye. And there's a reason why there's three legs to the stool, sometimes four if you're adding in research or data
Yep.
science. It's because we should disagree in some places, but it's the mutual respect and
Hmm.
understanding of where some people are going to make calls that allow you to function well. But it's
How do
also,
you go about getting that context then? How do you invite people into that, especially if you're in a company that's growing quickly and you're bringing on new folks? Some people
yeah.
aren't comfortable with that. They've never experienced that before. How do you invite them into this or expose them to this way of thinking?
Yeah, it's such a good question. It starts with you. And I think you, whether you're a product leader or a product manager, I think that this
Mm.
can be done regardless of your level. It's the way that you are communicating and ultimately being vulnerable. I think
Mhm.
there's so much pressure to always know the answer and, be right all the time. But what I found is when you're willing to say, I was wrong about this, or, I'm really open to feedback. I'm not sure. Or these are the things I'm thinking about. I'd really welcome your input. Those are all ways to indicate that you're not closed off and that you want people to engage with you. And I think starting there is really important.
I
When
think
I,
that leads with a sense of humility too, right? So there's that I'm humble enough to know that I don't know all the answers, but confident. You talk about humble confidence a lot, both on the podcast and in my company. And humble confidence is this dichotomy between humility enough to say I can take on, or I have a lot to learn. Confidence to know I can take on any challenge and I'm willing to do it with you. You know,
I like
and and I think that that's something that I'm hearing the way that you shape your teams is that, well, yeah, I'm humble enough to go, hey, I've got ideas. I'm confident. I'm here for a reason, but ultimately, let's talk about it. Let's work it out.
Yeah, definitely. And I'll tell you, I think some of it has to do not only with the background that I shared, but also how I got into this specific role. So,
Okay.
yeah, so I started at my current company as an individually contributing product manager. And a few months in, my manager left, the VP of product, and I was asked to take her role. And
Wow.
I thought, no way. There's a lot of steps between senior product manager and VP of product.
Sure.
But I love building teams. I was definitely at the point in my career where I was eager to mentor people and pass on some of my learnings. I really do love building out processes. So I thought, director, let's go director and see how that works. And so I was in that role for a while. It was great. It worked for me. Unfortunately or fortunately, the organization needed more from product leadership. They needed someone who was in the executive org, who was in board meetings, who was really sitting at the same table as the CEO and CTO. And so I grew into that role. But I think because I started as an individually contributing product manager, I knew that work really well. And I had to work my way up and build up my own confidence and the trust of the other executives to see me as having a seat at that table.
Right.
And it was a hard upward, battle because at the time that I took on that director role, product was not seen in a good light in the organization.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
So, one of the first things I did is I sat with our head of people just to understand why is product seen this
There's a
way.
story there. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And I got some insights from him, which was really helpful. And I decided to basically do a 360-degree review of myself um, within the organization. So I created this survey, and I've actually used it every single year since just to measure progress. And I asked questions like, how good is our communication? Do you feel like you understand our metrics and goals? Can you influence our roadmap? Things like that on a 5-point scale. And I identified the areas that we were the weakest. And then
Mm.
I explicitly worked on those areas. If people didn't understand our metrics, I was going to make sure they were very clear and I was going to report on them at every single moment I got. And that's how I just slowly, I think, over time shifted both the way that product was seen within the organization and the way that we functioned as a team. We needed to be vulnerable. We need to be willing for people to tell us we weren't doing a good job in order for us to figure out what to do about it.
I'm curious. We've debated this a little bit, both with our clients and within our own company or peers that I have in the product space. There's there's some debate around how much context is enough context and how much context is maybe too much context.
Hmm.
And the reason I say that is one of the conversations that came up and it challenged me because I didn't know. I'm more like you. Partly because I process out loud.
Hmm.
So I'm sharing almost everything I know so that everyone can kind of be on the same page and we can make decisions together and where no information's hidden. Um, but one of the pieces of feedback I got from a team member years ago was your sharing is great, but it puts a lot of burden and weight on me because that's your role to carry the weight of knowing all those things.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I said, that's interesting. I said, I'm thinking giving you a gift of knowledge and context and information so that you can be more informed, empowered, and autonomous.
Yeah.
And you see it as, I don't really want to know how good or bad the numbers are, right? I don't really want to know how I want to pick up the ticket. I want to write the best piece of code I've ever written in my entire life. And and then I want to see that feature, get shipped. How do you battle that feeling of like, just let me do my work? I don't want to know. I mean, does that come up? Do you run into that same scenario?
Certainly, certainly. And I think you're speaking the language of product in that it's so important to know your audience
Yes.
and know what they need and where they're at the moment. And so certainly there's some amount I'm thinking about with my team, with kind of future of the business and where we're going.
Yeah.
Where 2 years ago, I was not sharing that information with them, and that was intentional. You sometimes you need to focus the team on what's at hand, and you don't want them to get distracted. But now I'm more transparent with them because I need them to know where we're thinking of going so that they can help me make good decisions to get there,
Right.
and not get blindsided as well. So it's knowing the audience and then also temporally, where they are in time and kind of ultimately what you need out of them. Engineering is interesting. I think some engineers love to really know all of the why and be close to the customer, and they're great at being collaborative partners. And some want to be building quickly and they want you to filter out everything else. And both are great partners.
Absolutely.
And it just kind of depends on the person.
And you as a good product leader have to know the context of that person, right? You have to know, what are they motivated by? Is it a beautiful, well documented piece of code, or is it, seeing the eyes light up on an end user? Both of
Exactly.
those have their value, but
Yeah.
you might need to know what motivates or and maybe, brings a person alive.
Exactly. And I'll share that I meet with our engineering leads and engineering managers bi-weekly because I feel like I need to be really in touch with what's going on in
Yeah,
engineering.
of course.
Even though our CTO is wonderful, I don't want to just have that touch point with the CTO. I want to know what's happening on the ground. And of course, I talk with my product managers on those teams, but I want to talk to the engineering leads and engineering managers. And it gets back to this idea that having those relationships gives you all the context that you need and the kind of organizational soft tissue to make sure things are kind of moving slowly and you're understanding the zeitgeist and kind of what's happening below the surface.
I'm curious, do you have either a formal or informal rubric or mental checklist of kind of, let's say you're meeting a new employee or a new peer for the first time?
Hmm.
What's the context that you're looking for at first? What's the things that you go to and you think, I know that if I can gather these X number of things, that I start to have an understanding of who this person is and
Hmm.
how they get brought into this story or into this scenario or into our context as an organization or as a team. You
Yeah.
may not have that. I'm just curious, do you have some kind of go-to things that you first look for when you're thinking about context of maybe this specifically the individual? And maybe the second question is context of end user or context of,
Hmm.
problem to solve. I'm curious if you have kind of a rubric for that.
That's a great question. I wouldn't say I have a rubric, but certainly a question I find myself asking quite a bit is, were you surprised by anything, or what have you learned?
Mm,
I'm always really curious to understand what people have learned so that I can file it away in kind of a learning, but also to understand how they're processing things. Um, some people are really great at picking up on all of the pieces and putting them together in a story, and some people aren't. So either I can help, like, oh, okay, does that mean that this and this is happening? Or um, I can take away that maybe they're missing some of the pieces of the context. And I think also asking that question helps create that culture of, we should be learning and asking these questions, and why didn't that work, and what do you think you would do differently next time. So that's when I definitely ask quite a bit when I'm just trying to understand somebody's context. Um, in terms of a customer, I think it's a little different. For the customer, I want to understand, we build software, I build software. So I'm only getting the clicks on the screen, and I always want to know what their day is. What are they doing? Where does this piece of software fit in their work? So I want to ask questions about, how are you using us? When do you choose us? When do you not choose us? What else are you using? Things like that, to really understand the context of the particular platform I'm building relative
yeah.
to everything that they're doing in their work.
That's really good. We recently worked on a project where this client had had a product for a long time, and the user adoption, the user engagement was extremely low, extremely. And
Mm,
it was a suite of products, but there's one part of the product that just had almost no engagement.
mm, mm,
And when we looked at it, to be fair, there was a lot of user experience things that were made obvious as to why. But then as we went and actually talked to the potential users, as these happened to be employees of a large organization, what we learned was that they had all found another way around it.
mm,
They had the existing alternative wasn't another piece of software, or wasn't them like abandoning it and just not doing it. They built their own spreadsheets. They made their
mm,
own macros. They were, they just sent emails back and forth really fast, or text back and forth really fast, or whatever that was. What the challenge was is that it created inconsistency and inefficiencies. So the company was like, that's great, but we need you all to kind of get in here and row in the same direction. But ultimately, it wasn't until we said, hey, we're going to build this new tool with you.
mm,
And you could say we're like with us. And we're like, no, no, no. We want to invite you into that process. We want to make this with you and for you, because ultimately it's your tool. And that immediately it like gave us permission. It like all of a sudden the wall came down of like, you're going to ask me to use a new thing. I have to adopt something I don't want. And it became this, oh, I get to be a part of the journey, which I think in product, when we get the opportunity to, speaking to the user at that level and bringing them into that journey, whether it's a customer advisory board or a user research group, there is something just magical about getting a chance to say, what's your day like? Who are you? What do you think about? Do you even think about software? You're right. Is this just an annoyance? This is a distraction. Do you love AI? Have you ever used AI? Do you care less about AI? Are you afraid of it? All these factors come into the way we make decisions. It sounds like that's a lot of what you're talking about is understanding the root person. You said bring earlier we talked about bringing your whole self.
yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I love that you're bringing the customer into it, because, we don't always get the opportunity to build hand in hand with customers. But when you do, you're building up that relationship and that partnership, and really getting a much clearer understanding of what they're doing. There's a really large market research firm that we work with, and
Cool.
we've worked with them for a very long time. And they, I would say for, if it's 6 years that we've worked with them, for the first 5, it was a bit of a painful relationship. They would ask us for things. We would not understand why. We would push back. I would push back.
Yeah.
And finally, this past year, I started to have a recurring meeting with their head of technology. And it's just me, and sometimes I bring in one of my product managers. And I just wanted to understand what they're trying to do with our company and what their needs are. And that relationship has made a huge difference. We're in the process of building something that's pretty much bespoke for them, which is very rare for us. We don't often do it. We'll really only do if we think we can apply it to other customers.
Of
But
course.
deeply understanding their use case allowed us to think about how we could apply that more bespoke thing to more customers, the value it had, and it's allowed us to grow that relationship. So it is such a gift when customers are either doing something outside your platform that you can then dig into and understand why, if you want to bring it onto platform or not. And also, being able to work really closely with a customer. I think it's, I've worked in B2C and I've worked in B2B, and I do love the amount of data you get in B2C and the ability to run
Yeah.
experiments, but you don't get as much of the direct customer touch points. I mean, I know specific users at specific companies and their problems, and I can reach out to them and have really good conversations with them. That's, I think, unique to B2B enterprise, and one of the reasons why, yeah, I like being in this space.
I also in B2B, and I couldn't agree with you more. I've done B2C in the past, and it was always a number on the screen, right? And there's
Yeah.
something first off, there's a reason we name this people of product, because we love knowing and understanding people, and we don't want to build technology that just sits on a shelf, right? And so ultimately we want to build it for someone who gets value from it. And so that relationship is a huge, huge factor. And ultimately, it's also fun too. I mean, like, you get to actually see a person physically respond to the thing you've spent hours, days, weeks, months, years working on, which is a great feeling.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so I'm curious, where are areas that people get this wrong? Where are
Hmm.
there things that you're saying, hey, yes, we need to be willing and able to share our context. We need to be opening up for feedback in a culture that has vulnerability. We need to come in and better understand our users and be able to collaborate with them and understand the environment that they're working in. And whether you're moving up into a leadership role and understanding what motivates our peers and the boards, or you're speaking to the team below you and trying to make sure they understand that context, or even the other department, right? Speaking technology or design or whatever that is, where do people get it wrong?
There's so many ways to get it wrong.
Yeah, where do we start? Yeah, right.
I'll start with one of the places that I often get it wrong.
Yeah, good.
So I have a really strong bias towards action. So
Mm,
my first instinct is to go now, yesterday. And for better or worse, building up that context and those relationships takes time. So I'll give an example. Early on, when I took on the director role, we decided between our then VP of engineering, now CTO, and I, that we needed to reorganize our engineering and product teams. And so we identified kind of how we were going to organize the product, the surface areas, and then which PMs we were going to map to each of those product surface areas. And then I presented that back out to my team. And I think this must have happened over the course of a week, maybe 2 weeks max. It was fast. Um, and I had already, fortunately at the time, built up a culture of feedback. Please give me feedback. I'm new to this role. We're all doing our best. And one of the product managers, thankfully, in our next check in said, I have a piece of feedback for you. I totally understand why you put me in this place, and I'm excited about it. But it would have been better if I felt like I was more a part of the process.
mm,
It was such good feedback. I really took it to heart. And of course, we were in a phase of the company where we were reorging once a year. So the next time it came around, I had a completely different approach to it. I knew it was going to take longer. I wanted to bring the PMs in. I made sure we had workshopping time and discussion time. And by the time we did the reorg, it felt like more of a bottoms up experience. So time is something that, is so precious to us, but I think that spending just a little bit more of it up front often pays off.
patience. I don't have it either. I'm with you. That bias for action has come back to bite me it's caused some huge successes for us,
Hmm.
and it's also come back to bite me, probably more than successes. So I hear you. That's absolutely correct. That's such a good word and a good reminder, because I know that there's a lot of folks, a lot of the leaders that are listening to this podcast. They have shared with me, George, I want to get more done with my team. Why aren't we moving fast enough? Why aren't we making more? Why aren't we, producing X? And that level of saying, maybe you can sometimes get more done by slowing down. Whew, that's hard.
It's a really hard lesson because it's certainly not what I want to do.
Right. Right.
Just want to power forward, but I'll also share one thing to that end that I found really effective is retrospectives. Of course,
Yes.
many teams do them at the end of a sprint within the engineering org. I think engineering is really great at retrospectives, but I found it to be really effective to bring a really simple start, stop, and continue retro framework to product or even to cross functional teams. So, for example, at the beginning of every year, or maybe December, end of the year, as we're planning for our next year with the product org, we'll do a big retro where we'll say what worked well last year and where do we have room for improvement. And then we'll use that to restructure our meeting and set some high level goals for ourselves. And I think it's a great way, to that question of how do we do more? How do we get more out of this team is to give people the space to think about that question and come up with some ideas themselves. I actually ran a retro really recently, last week, with a cross functional go to market team, which, sales and marketing, they're not used
Yeah.
to doing
Yeah.
retrospectives, but they're great at it. And it was so effective. This meeting just, it wasn't clicking. We weren't getting things done. And I knew we could get a lot more out of the team. And so we did this retro and we're restructuring the meeting. And we had our first kind of reworked one this week, and it was a completely different meeting. And I think we're going to be doing a lot more and kind of working differently coming out of it.
I love that. I am a huge fan of retrospectives. We do them all the time for different reasons and different levels and teams. We do them with our clients, which
Mm-hmm.
is which at first they're like, you want me to say it out in the open right now? And it's like, yeah, it's what we're here for. Good, bad, ugly, good, let's go. And once you do it once, I would say once you do it twice, then people, if they've seen the vulnerability, like we talked about earlier,
Yeah.
um, and see us model it, then ultimately, then it becomes oh no, they're serious, right? This is meant to make us better. And this isn't lip service. This isn't a game. This is here's a valuable activity. So I'm a huge fan of retrospectives. I love that. I love that. I love that. Okay. Okay. Well, as we wrap up, one of the last things I always love to ask, because the world's changing really fast right now, right? I mean, with technology, which is both exciting and scary all at the same time, and the economy and the world, I don't know, all of it seems like it's in flux right now.
Mm-hmm.
What is something on a positive note that you're excited about? What's something either personally, within your company, within the market, within the space that you look ahead and you go, this, I'm here for it. What's getting you excited right now?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I appreciate the fact that you brought up that so much is in flux and so much is changing. And technology is a tool. And the way we decide to use that tool is going to make such a difference in the future.
Hmm.
So um, I think about this quote from one of my professors at Harvard, Howard Gardner, a professor of cognition. And he said, I'll paraphrase, but essentially, doing something new is novelty. That's easy. Doing something that's new and useful, that's creativity. That's great. But doing something that's new and useful and also aligns to ethical standards and improves the human
Mm.
condition, that's good work. And so I guess what I'm excited about is finding applications of this really powerful technology, specifically AI, that is good work, that is going to improve the condition of people in demonstrable ways. I get really excited about, the new GPT release. I love playing around with it. It's playing with fire. It's fun. And the latest Apple release Sure, it can be, I'm all for creativity and designing your own emojis. And sure, I want help writing better emails too. But I think we have an opportunity to do better, to do
Yeah.
really good work with this technology. And um, certainly Remesh is a step in that direction, just to, underscore my company for a minute, because it really is about using AI to understand people and make changes within organizations, or brands. But there's just a world out there that I think, whether it's in healthcare or education or communication, that hopefully we can collectively tap into and start applying it in ways that is really more aligned to the good work side of things.
I don't think I could say it better. That's a beautiful, optimistic look at the future. I hope people err towards that. Would you say novelty, usefulness,
Hmm.
and ethical?
Yeah.
Right. If those three things are in play, we
Hmm.
could at least be heading in the right direction.
Exactly.
I
Yeah.
love that. Well, Jessica, this has been such a pleasure to talk with you. I know we could talk for a lot longer and nerd out on lots of other topics around culture and design and product and technology and all the things that we get to think about on a day to day basis. But for now, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for the good work that you're doing. I'm lucky to know that one of my former employees is now on your team, and she has nothing but beautiful things to say about the organization, about you, and that means a lot to me, and also means a lot to me that she's being taken care of at such an incredible place. So that's really really cool.
It's
And
such a
I
connection.
love
We're happy to have her.
awesome. And then I love to roll out the red carpet for you. Where can people learn more about you, about what you're working on, and what you got to do in the world?
Yeah, thank you. LinkedIn, I think, is the best place. I will post some of my writing on LinkedIn. I used to do Medium, and I was a bit more prolific as I was processing products. So you can find some of my older writing on a Medium, but now I mostly do LinkedIn. And I'd love to hear from people if people have questions or thoughts about developing culture. And their product organizations, or just want to say hi. As I said, I'm still a sponge for everything product, and I still have so much to learn, especially as it comes to product leadership. So I welcome any outreach.
Awesome. Well, Jessica, thank you again for coming on the podcast today. It was such a pleasure.
Thank you, George.
People of Product is brought to you by Crema, a design consultancy that helps forward-thinking leaders discover, understand, and execute on their greatest opportunities. Learn more at crema.us.